We continue now with the talks for this opening day. So we have now Giovanni Albani, professor at the Conservatorio Jacopo Tramontini at Italy. He's talking about the tropical generalized interval system. So,
muchas gracias, buenos días. And my Spanish is finished now. Good morning, thank you very much. And I also have to thank you to be here, also on behalf of my co-author and colleague Paolo Bernardi, who couldn't be here today, but he sends his greeting. So, the aim of the research I'm going to present today is to offer a proposal for a refinement of the generalized interval system by the specific means of tropical scenarios. What is the idea? Is to show that such a new framework can allow us to broaden the GIS model, introducing a new operation and consequently new potential musical and conceptual insights and application. How can we do so? Formalizing a consistent relations between musical elements in a hopefully unified, bigger structure. So let us start with some mathematics, with the algebraic structures we need for defining this conceptual framework. And let's start with the concept of a semigroup. A semigroup is just an ordered pair made up of a set, a non-empty set, and an associative binary operation. So notice that it is a semigroup because we don't need an identity element and we don't need the inverse. So it's just closure, what we don't mention here, and associative operation, just that. So it is, we can say also it is a magma with an associative operation, to say it in another way. Then, with the concept of a semigroup, we can define a semiring that is made up of a triple, made up of a non-empty set, and two operations that we call addition and multiplication. They both are semigroups, so again, just associative binary operations, but we have one requirement more, and that is that such multiplication left and right distributes over addition. So we have this rule that connects the two operations. Then we can finally define a tropical semiring that is just a semiring, but with idempotent addition. So we have this operation that, if applied between an element and itself, get back the element again. So this is the only one more requirement we need for defining a tropical semiring. Maybe now some of yours can start wondering, what does this tropical adjective means? And I'm sorry to tell you, it doesn't have nothing to do with vacation, the sea, or whatever, not at all. The adjective tropical was coined by French mathematicians, including Generic Pen, in honor of their Brazilian colleague, Imre Simon, who was one of the pioneers in tropical semirings. There is no deeper meaning in it, but I love that name. That's why I have started researching and find something. It's just what I think sometimes I do as a composer and as a music theorist as well. I like to find something a little bit weird inside the mathematical side. And then I tell myself, let's see if this is something, if it can be useful some way for music theory or for composing. So I looked at this beautiful adjective and I had to do something with it. And something we did, I think. Mm-hmm. So finally, just to close this long, well, not that much long, this list of concepts, we can define the two more famous tropical semirings. They are the min plus and the max plus algebra. They are very easy to understand because the set is just real numbers plus infinity or minus infinity, and with the operations defined as follows. The tropical addition, O plus, is just the minimum or the maximum between the two elements. And the tropical multiplication is the conventional addition. And you see that in the min plus algebra and the max plus algebra, it is needed the presence of the infinity or minus infinity just because they want in it the identity element. But it is not in general, theoretically speaking, needed in a tropical semi-ring. And we will see an example in music where we don't need it, and it doesn't have any sense to require it. Okay, now we have all the concepts to try to refine, in my way, the GIS. Okay. So let us just recall the definition of a generalized interval system that is an ordered triple where M is a set of musical objects of any kind. Usually, and also in my paper, I just studied lattices, but as you know, I think, we have generalized interval system of any kind of musical elements, like for instance, triads or whatever. And then there is G, that is a group, usually called the group of intervals in a very broad sense, and phi is an action of G on M that is free and transitive. So this is the basic and most compact definition we can give about the GIS. How can we try to extend it? This way. We considered an ordered triple. Again, we have a set of musical objects, but instead of just a group, we require a semi-ring there, where the multiplication is a group, but we add another operation that here is the tropical addition, and then the action is the one, again, of the group on the elements. So it's very easy. We can just consider a GIS as we know it, and we add an operation, and we require then this distributive law between the tropical addition and the tropical multiplication. That's how we can refine existing GIS without inventing new ones. So we can see it from the other point of view of taking something with a group, and from that group build a semi-ring. And now let's go to tropical generalized interval system, which are extended generalized one, but where S is a tropical semi-ring. So we require that that new operation we add is idempotent. So something more. It's not just associative, but and not just distributing. Well, multiplication is distributing over addition, but also idempotent. And that's what we studied, or we tried to study in our paper, just tropical generalized interval system. So we narrowed down to this singular case. So let's try to offer two examples of infinite tropical GIS, and let us start with a very straightforward, if not trivial, example. So let's consider it the following GIS, where P is the infinite set of equal tempered pitches, and this group of intervals is isomorphic to the set of integers Z. A quite easy situation, I think. And then let's define the tropical addition as follows, just as the minimum between the two operands. And the tropical multiplication is just the conventional addition. Both the operations are musically meaningful, because the tropical addition in this case just gives us the smallest interval. Easy. And the tropical multiplication is the usual sum or composition between intervals. That's what we had in the original GIS. The tropical semi-ring structure of it can be then inferred from the mean plus algebra that we presented a few slides ago, of which our semi-ring is a sub-semi-ring. So also mathematically we can get the semi-ring quite easily. And also we notice that in our semi-ring there is no identity element for the tropical addition. We don't have an element big enough to be bigger than any other ones. In fact, after all, there is not a musical concept, or I don't know it, for an infinite interval, unless we decide to formally introduce it and to consider it to be musically meaningful. And anyway, we do not need it in our structure. So we see also how the structure is quite generally powerful, because we don't. It can be that we don't need these identities. Okay, this is very easy and straightforward, but more exotic is the tropical paper. Solutions embodying musical meaning can be found in defining the tropical addition. So let's try to see one of them. So let's now consider the GIS defined as it follows. F are all the frequencies represented as positive rational numbers. And Q is the group of frequency ratios that are positive rationals written as irreducible fractions as well. So again, we are in a context of a GIS that we all know or we can easily understand. And then let us try to define the tropical addition and multiplication as follows. So the tropical addition outputs the greatest common divisors between the numerators of two elements of Q over the least common multiple of the denominators of the two. I'm going to understand what happens there. And the tropical multiplication is the usual multiplication, that here is the conventional, I can say, composition of two intervals in this multiplicative context. What happens? O plus outputs then one of the two elements only if the multiplication of it by a natural number gives the other operand. In case it does not, it outputs the biggest element in Q, such as the two operands can be obtained multiplicating it by natural numbers. It is an idempotent operational multiplication, so we found a tropical GIS, a working one, and musically speaking, from the point of view of music acoustics, it outputs the biggest interval expressed as a ratio in respect of which the two operands can be seen as natural harmonics, the biggest fundamental frequency. So we found something different, something that can be more interesting. I don't know what I will do with something like this, but it is a representation of something. So I have an operand that is idempotent and create a partial order, as we are going to see on this set of intervals, and relate them in the context of their position in the harmonic series over a fundamental it gets. It is something, it is a musical insight we have, and we can have it operating with the conventional sum of intervals. So considering our musical aims, and that's where I started, because I wanted to study these refinements in the case of the PLR group. I like a lot Neo-Riemannian theories, and I wanted to see if I could do something there, and I can tell you I couldn't. And I'm showing you now why, considering the problem, the issue of the tropical GIS in the finite case, in fact it is impossible to build finite, not trivial tropical GIS. We have mathematically proven that given a finite set of at least two elements, it is not possible to define two binary operations, such as one is associative, commutative, and idempotent, and the other is a group and is distributed over the first. Those were our requirements for the semi-rings, and this is impossible. And the sensitive requirement that cannot be satisfied is the distributive law that de facto connects the two operations. I can try to define an order on that to make it work, the two operations alone, but when I try to make them operate together, done. We don't have what we expect. And such a result is conceptually linked to the fact that cyclicity and linearity are, of course, I could say, not compatible concepts. In fact, it is well known that every element of a finite group generates a cyclical subgroup. So in the finite case, I'm sure that I am in a situation of cyclicity. But also we have proven that to define in a set a binary operation that is associative, commutative, and idempotent, so this is another result we give in the paper, is equivalent to defining a partial order in which for any two elements there is a greatest lower bound, and also to defining a partial order in which for any two elements there is a least upper bound. So you have a linear order, partial, but you have an order that is linear, and you require in this situation, so I'm just telling you the proof of the theorem in a very concise way, that so you want to have a situation in which the elements are on a line and also on a circle altogether, and that's impossible. Okay, so what next? Well, The idea is that we think that there are several uncharted possibilities in the definition of the semi-ring addition that could trigger new ideas and conceptual insights in dealing with such elements. Okay, we now know that in the case of tropical GIS, we only can study infinite ones. But in our paper and in our studies, in our research, we just tried a very narrowed down list of cases. There may be more. So we have to be creative and to find new ideas. And in general, the more general case of extended GIS, where idempotent addition is not required, is still open to further studies. We have not studied it yet. So it can be that there, where we don't require this idempotent condition and show the order, we can find something that explains something about the musical element that we are studying. So for instance, I'm now trying to study something similar to the PLR group, but in the infinite case. So if I'm not in the case of equal temperament, I can study it on an infinite plane and look what happens and try to define different tropical addition, well, not tropical in this case, different addition in a semi-group form, and see if I can find some interesting and meaningful insights about the structures I'm studying. And that's all. Muchas gracias.
Any questions?
Yes, please.
Could you go back to the definition of a tropical semi-ring that's back at the beginning?
Yes.
I just want to see if I missed something.
The definition, the complete definition, yes?
Yeah. Tropical, whoa. Okay. Okay, I guess it was after that then. Maybe one more bullet item? No? No, forward. There. Oh, the min plus algebra, max plus algebra. That. Don't we need an order specified for that?
The order comes out of the addition, of the tropical addition itself. Ah, yes, of course, I know what you mean. If I have to define a minimum there, yes, I'm using the real with the order. Yes, in that case, of course. So the function minimum is defined of the natural order we put on reals. Yes, yes. My fault, not right. Not right. This was just that.
That's all.
Okay.
Is there any other
Thank you.
question?
Yes, in the first part of the presentation, you said that there was no reason to conceptualize the infinite as a musical object. I don't know where the part. Can you go?
Yeah, I'm saying that in that case I see no reason, but it can be that if you want, you can put it inside.
That one. For an infinite interval, unless.
Now I'm talking of the concept of interval in this context of a lattice, just that.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine a big interval between pitches, and they say, okay, why defining this? Maybe I'm wrong. But
because
in other situations,
I have the question because you can think about the interval between the silence, which is 0 frequency, and a random pitch, and then if you try to calculate the interval, the result is infinite.
Ah, that's a good idea. Yes, thank you.
To
We had to talk yesterday.
To integrate the silent as 0 into the real into the vector space you are using or whatever structure as the silence, and then you get, if you try to calculate whatever you want to calculate the interval between a random pitch, you get positive infinite.
Oh, that's a beautiful idea. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, yes. Of course, here I was just thinking of in this very narrow down situation, and maybe that's the issue. That all my paper is just, I was thinking about just this situation, but that's a beautiful idea, yes. And also open new ideas about this concept of infinity music. So why not for a future paper, I don't know, wherever we will be in 2021. Yes, thank you very much.
Could you provide some examples where you found these tropical GISs to meaningfully model musical structures?
We found just we just studied 3 cases. We found a lot of situations where you face a situation where you get stuck, where it is impossible. But I can show you another one, for instance. Meaningful. Because I expected a question like this, and here it is. So, studying it for in the case of n-limit just tuning situations. And so we try to define, let's say meaningful, but again, it depends what are you searching from the point of view of a music theorist. And here we define the addition this way, and so we consider higher, let's say, an interval you get for having the higher basis with higher powers. But again, is it meaningful? I don't know, it depends. It is a way. Here I was thinking about autonality and eutonality by Henry Parrish. It's something connected, but not that much. So another idea could be to use the Parrish ideas and systems and formalization and see if we can formalize it this way. The idea is that you are ordering these elements. It's just that just because of the lemma I told that you get a partial order, these operations help you defining an order on the set. But that kind of order can be quite strange, creative in a way. And so if you're looking, for example, in this case, the question was, why should be higher if I have the power of 5 positive than negative? So we tried with absolute value, but it doesn't work. And again, it can be that it is better because it is a natural harmonics. And so we get a consonance. And so we are representing consonance in a way, but we are still studying. And so this I find interesting about these ideas that I start from a model. So I say, okay, I want to use this tropical model. Let's see what I get. And then let's see if there is some musical meaning that I don't understand now, but I can understand later. And also this, for instance. So I can define something and I can represent something that then I can use operatively very quickly. I think about informatics in this case, because then because of this distributive law, I can have these big formulas in which I relate with all this data very quickly, just using these 2 operations. So I don't know. This is another example that can be interesting. I don't know. I'm studying more and more of them. I hope I answered the question in a way.
So I think we can discuss these topics later because we need to give way to the next presentation. So thank you very much.